of it. Just to start by saying, you are most welcome to engage with this in the way that suits you best. So you're welcome to keep your camera off if you would like, and you are welcome to do what you need to be comfortable. If you need to fidget or to stim or to take a break, then please go ahead. We will try to stick to the advertised time and to take breaks so that hopefully people can stay comfortable, because it can be quite tiring being on a webinar non-stop. This morning we have our second major paper, which will be given by Dr. Leon van Ommen and Dr. Sheila Akomia. If you joined us yesterday, you will have heard from Leon already. He is the co-director of the Centre for Autism and Theology, and works on the intersection of autism, sensory experience, liturgy, and spirituality, and particularly looking at how marginalised communities experience worship and religious belonging, with a focus on those who are Black and non-speaking. And Sheila Akomia is a research fellow at the University of Aberdeen, and working with Leon on an AHRC funded project, Access Denied, which focuses on that very intersection of autism, ethnic minority and non-speaking. And Sheila also lectures in African theology at the Church Mission Society in Oxford, and is a presbyter in an African Pentecostal church in Glasgow. And this morning they will be speaking to us about the spiritual and religious lives of non or minimally speaking autistic people. So they're going to speak now for 30 to 40 minutes. And at the end of that, we'll take a 5-minute break. And after that, we'll have Q&A. Please, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A box. The questions are being moderated and will be fed through and put to Leon and Sheila. So you can start putting questions in the box when we come to our 5-minute break and when we return from it. So I think that's all that I need to say this morning. So at this point, Leon and Sheila, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, it's great to be here again, day 2 of the conference. It's great to see so many of you here, and we are really excited to present this part of our research where we engage with non-speaking or minimally speaking autistic people. I realize that that's maybe the language that not everyone wants to use. There is different terminologies here. This is a terminology that we think that at least a part of the autistic community that we've been working with prefers, and so that's what we will use. Sometimes we abbreviate it to non-speaking, but that includes minimally speaking as well. So let me try and share my slides. Just give me a moment. All right, I hope you can see that. All right, so the spiritual and religious lives of non or minimally speaking autistic people. What we will do, I will first, well, here's the agenda really. I will first speak about the silenced voices of non-speaking autistic individuals, their absence from academia and also faith communities, especially churches. Then we speak about like how do we engage with non-speakers? In other words, methodology, to use the boring word. And then we will present the highlights that we got from the interviews that we did. And then there is a conclusion. And as Anna said already, there's time for Q&A. There should be ample time for that. So that's the overview for this session. Right, so let's dive in. The silenced voices of non-speaking autistic individuals. And I've quite deliberately titled this part of the presentation in this way, because this is what we hear often from people in the field, from non-speakers, from their carers, from parents, like our voices are not being heard. And so it's really often suppressed voices or silenced voices. Now, let's have a little look at this. So the absence from autism studies, and when I introduced the conference yesterday, I already hinted at this, that, or at least mentioned this, that when you look at autism studies, when you look at literature, it is really remarkable how little there is that engages with non-speakers directly. And that whilst an estimate of 25 to 35% of autistic people are minimally speaking. The figures here vary a little bit, but this is a kind of an accepted figure, 25 to 35%. It's very difficult to know exactly. And just to illustrate this point that they're absent from autism studies, here's a study that I recently came across by Allison and Pelfrey. They looked at the National Database for Autism Research in the USA, figures from 2016. There were 47,000 research participants, but only 11% of them have a verbal and performance IQ, PIQ, of less than 85, and a little of under 1% of these have any type of neuroimaging data available. Now, just 2 comments here, just to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. When they say verbal and performance IQ, it is not as if they lump non-speaking and intellectual disabilities together. And at the outside of this presentation, we need to make sure that we do not necessarily make that connection. So a lot of non-speakers, a lot of autistic people will have co-occurring learning disabilities, but not necessarily. So we have spoken in our research, and you will see that in a moment, we've engaged with some non-speakers who were perfectly articulate, just not with verbal spoken words, right? So they didn't have necessarily a learning disability. And these 2 researchers here, Allison and Pelfrey, do make that distinction. So verbal and performance IQ of less than 85, actually they have 5 subgroups under that. I think it was 5 subgroups. And they're interested in neuroimaging. That's why they were looking for the data. And that's the comment is about neuroimaging here in their study. That's not relevant to what we're discussing today. But again, it's just illustrating how little research there is with this group of people. Another illustration of this, another study looked into publications from major autism journals and intellectual disability or disability journals. And they kind of just doing a meta review of all the studies that involved autistic participants directly. They estimate that only 2% of those autistic participants were non or minimally speaking autistic people, here abbreviated as NMSAP. That's a study by Russell and their team from 2019. It should be said that a lot of autism studies don't include autistic participants at all. I think, if I remember correctly, it's about 50% of all the studies do actually involve autistic participants, whether that's quantitative studies or qualitative studies. And so of those 50% of the studies, only 2% of autistic participants were non or minimally speaking. In other words, they're virtually absent from autism studies in general. I'm not talking about autism theology here, just autism studies in general. All right, so I hope that illustrates quite bluntly, actually, the absence from autism studies. At the same time, because we're talking about autism and theology, we're with our center, we are interested in resourcing faith communities. We focused on churches. There is an absence from churches as well, it seems. So Eric Carter, a well-known researcher in this area, in an article in 2022, he reviewed kind of a lot of studies in the fields relevant to autism, disabilities, and faith. And he said, well, attendance of religious services is not uncommon. So autistic people do go to church, but another study found, and he quotes that study as well, autistic children are 50 to 70% less likely to attend religious services than others in their age groups. So yes, they will be there, but not all. fewer people will be there than you might expect. Another study by Andrew Whitehead, 2018, he compared several people or groups of people, and in a survey he asked the question like, do you never attend religious services or sometimes, etc. And to never attending religious services, 24% of people not on the autism spectrum, to use that word, said they never attend, and on the spectrum, 32%. In other words, a lot more people who identify as autistic do not attend religious services at all. Now, he compared this to certain groups, which he called people with chronic health conditions. I don't think autism is necessarily a chronic health condition, but that's the terminology that Whitehead used. If you compare different groups of people, those on the autism spectrum participate the least. They're at the bottom of the ladder, as it were, right? So statistically, it seems that autistic people are less present in church than you might think, and probably this is even more so for people who are non-speaking, and we'll come to that now. There was a study by ACAS and our team, 2019, and they said, and I quote, mothers of children with more severe ASD symptoms, and I should say I know that this is language that not everyone uses, but this is the language that was used in this article, so I'm just quoting from the article here. Mothers of children with more severe ASD, autism spectrum disorder, symptoms reported more negative interactions with members of their congregation. These results are consistent with qualitative studies that suggest that interactions within a religious setting may be challenging for parents of children with ASD. And they cite another study here. And then they go on with a couple of possible explanations for this. It is possible that children, and I quote again, it is possible that children with more severe ASD symptoms are perceived by members of the congregation as being disruptive. Congregation members may also lack familiarity with ASD and the challenges that parents experience, especially with children who are more severely affected. Thus, mothers in this study may perceive their fellow congregation members as being too demanding and critical due to a lack of understanding. End of quote. And again, I apologize if this language is upsetting. I know this is not necessarily preferred language in the autism community. But a couple of things to highlight here then are, so people who present very clearly, very visibly as autistic are perceived by members of the congregation as being disruptive. And anyone with autistic children who would fall into that category will probably testify that that is often how their children are perceived, or not only children, of course, also adults. There's a lack of familiarity, a lack of understanding very often in churches. And so, and mothers may perceive their fellow congregation members as being too demanding or critical. So the judgment, right? And so all of those might be reasons why parents don't take their children to church, why autistic people might not want to go to church themselves, because they will feel that judgment as well, of course. Right. So those are just a couple of things to demonstrate that the group of people that we chose to work with are severely underrepresented in autism studies and also possibly in churches. And nevertheless, many studies have demonstrated the benefits of spirituality and religion for mental health, for quality of life, for coping, for positive meaning making, etc. So it's not irrelevant to look into the spirituality and the religious lives of autistic people. And that brings me to the importance of this study, why I think, at least why we think, Sheila and I, that this is an important piece of work. And it's really, I mean, ultimately the aim is not to write a journal article or, you know, it's really for the benefit of autistic people themselves, hopefully. And so ultimately we hope that this will help to support non- and minimally speaking autistic people in their spiritual and religious lives by foregrounding their perspectives in faith communities and in academia, right? That is really important. And that's why we want to work directly with the autistic people to foreground their perspectives. And by gaining a better understanding of their spiritual and religious lives, we know very little about it. by raising their perspectives in autism studies and by raising awareness in faith communities. So hopefully you will agree that this study is important. Right. Now, with that, we move on then to methodology, to use the boring word, or to jazz that up a little bit, engaging with non and minimally speaking autistic people. Because there is a real question, like, why are people absent? What is happening here? Now, reasons for the absence in churches is what we saw, the judgments that is possibly perceived, a lack of awareness, lack of resources. Churches simply don't know how to support their members, their autistic members, often. Or the events are inaccessible, worship services or the spaces are inaccessible, etc., etc. Lots of reasons. When it comes to research, it becomes really interesting as well, because I think the big thing why so few researchers go into this field of study is simply because our methods are not fit for purpose, right? And we saw that. We tried to recruit participants. We wanted, our ideal was to have about 10 participants, autistic participants who were non or minimally speaking. Ultimately, after a lot of effort, we ended up with 7 participants. So very difficult. Now, why is that? It's not because those people are not there, but our usual ways of recruiting people may simply fail. For example, a lot of these people will not be on social media. And so if you recruit through social media, which is a common method for participant recruitment, it doesn't work, right? So not fit for purpose in terms of recruitment, our methods for data collection. I mean, a lot of qualitative research that we do is based on interviews, spoken interviews. Well, that obviously doesn't work with someone who has only a few words. So our methods for data collection are just not fit for purpose. And same with quantitative studies. Often, again, they don't reach even that group of people, so they don't know that those studies are there, or they're the surveys are done in a way that is just very inaccessible for this group of people. And then there is a third reason that I kind of speculate why some researchers are hesitant to work with non-autistic, non-speaking or or minimally speaking autistic participants, and that is the discussion about proxy participants. That is, if someone is not able to communicate for themselves or speak for themselves, researchers sometimes rely on carers or family members. Now, there is a whole discussion in the literature, like how reliable is that? And there is quite some pushback against that. And I can understand that, because what we saw in our family, which did include, in our research, which did include family and carers, there was this discussion about what can we know and what can we not know. And actually, this became a theme in our research. So methodologically, to use the big words, epistemologically, like, what can we know? That's the question of epistemology. I shouldn't use big words, should I? But what can we know? How do we know what we know? And so I imagine that some people will say, well, no, we can't trust the family members to speak for the autistic participants. And we have examples where family members actually misinterpreted, right? Okay, good. But then at the same time, I'm thinking, well, family members and carers who have cared for a person for a long time often are the persons who know them very well, and they do have certain knowledge. We'll come back to this in a moment. Let me just explain what we did then. So we chose to work with autistic people themselves, but where possible also to ask perspectives from carers and family members, just to give a rounded picture, not for them to speak for the autistic participants, even though that happens on some occasions where the participant simply wasn't able to engage in the way that we did our research, but also to hear their perspective. So here's an overview of our participants. So in the left column, you see the 7 participants that we have. These are all pseudonyms, except for Lewis at the bottom. Lewis and his mom, Kate, chose not to be anonymous and requested not to be anonymous. And so we felt we had to respect that, of course. The others are pseudonyms. So we have Gemma, Kieran, Angus, Sophia, and Judah, and Tucker, and Lewis. Gemma used, so if you look at the third column, Gemma used BSL, British Sign Language, and an AAC, an augmented and assistive communication software or device. Kieran used spelling board, spelling to communicate. So that's basically a board with letters on, or a sheet with letters on. He points to the letters and Mum transcribes it, as it were. And yeah, and so both were very, very able to articulate exactly what they were wanted to communicate to us. And then Angus had a few words, not too many. Often said, "I don't know," without further engagement. So Mum talks quite a lot for him. With Sofian, he didn't use any words in the interview. We know that he knows at least the word amen because that came up in the interview. So Dad did the talking there. With Judah, he didn't use words in the interview. And he had a long-term carer and friend we did an interview with, and Mum was there as well. And I did a separate interview with Mum. Tucker didn't actually, I said few words. He does communicate in typical ways, but he has actually more than a few words, and he sings a lot. And through the singing, he makes connections, but you need to know that, right? So I'll tell you a very funny story. When we went over the consent form that he had, he got that beforehand, of course. He had time to think about whether he wanted to participate. And then one of the care workers in where he lived said, well, this researcher Leon is coming, and he's from the Netherlands and all of that. And so we went over the consent form, and at the end of the form, I said, "Do you have any questions?" He said, "Yes." I said, "What is your question?" "Can we please sing Tulips of Amsterdam?" And I was caught out because I don't know the song at all, but he knew it. So that was really fun. So it was his way of making connections, right? And so I think that points to one of the things that is really important when we work with non-speakers is like try to tune in to how they want to communicate on their terms, right? And of course, again, standard research methods might not be fit for purpose. All right. And then Lewis used few words, and I had the privilege of visiting him various times and spoke to a lot of people in his community, which was absolutely wonderful. Right, so that's the overview of the participants, additional participants, how they communicated, and then we also used the technique, communication technique called talking mats. And most of the participants used that, but Gemma and Kieran chose not to use that. Right. A talking mat, what is that? This is what a talking mat looks like. So at the very bottom of the screen, you see a symbol, faith. That is the symbol card. That is the symbol for the topic, this topic card. And then at the top, you see a thumbs up, thumbs down, and kind of somewhere in the middle. And that's called the top scale. So I used, and then I had a kind of a makeshift talking mats symbol set. So talking mats, the cards that you see with the green frame and the orange frame, those are actually the official talking mats symbols that I took from other symbol sets. So they have for healthcare, for leisure, all of that. But for spirituality, there was no one. So I kind of, when I did my training for talking mats and using that, I kind of created my own symbol set. Luckily, as a tangent here, I got in touch with, someone put me in touch with the CEO of Talking Mats and the founder, one of the founders. And I said, well, there was nothing. And I'd be keen to see a Talking Mats set on spirituality and religion. And they could absolutely see the value of that. And so I'm really delighted to say that we got working together. And this afternoon, we will do a soft launch of a whole new symbol set on spirituality and religion for Talking Mats. That was a spoiler and attention to. So just watch this space this afternoon. Really excited for this. Anyways, here's my makeshift kind of talking mats set. So I use this with most participants. And what it is, basically you give one symbol after another to what we call the thinker. I was the listener. And the thinker placed them on the mat where they feel like, for example, thumbs up could be, yes, this is something I'm engaging with, or this is important for my spiritual life, or not at all, then it's the right side of the mat. Okay? So in that way, you structure a conversation and people don't need to talk. They can put the symbol somewhere, and then, you know, if they use words, they can add to that. And so I use this a lot. This is talking about that Tucker did, actually. Right. So that's the method that I used as a kind of conversation starter. So just a final slide on methodology. So we can start to gain some knowledge and understanding. We can actually, right? Even if methods are not fit for purpose, we need to work around it. We need to see what can we know. Because the participants themselves, they do know. They do know what their spirituality is. They cannot always communicate it, but they do know. And so there's no reason not to try to get to know. There's no reason to assume that they don't understand. There's no reason to assume that they don't know what's going on, that they don't have a spiritual life. That was, you know, yesterday we talked at length about that. And family and caregivers often do know, but also sometimes they don't know. And this was one of the themes that came up in the research. It was striking that one and the same person, for example, just as one example, it came up with multiple people, but Sofian's dad said with much conviction a couple of things about Sofian's spirituality. And I said, like, how on earth do you know? And at the same time, he was also, with conviction, he said, well, I don't know. And so we analyzed this a little bit, and what it seems, and this is kind of, you know, this, we need to explore this further, but it seems that when it comes to observable behavior, family and carers do know very well the people in their care, or their child, or their brother in Tucker's case. They know, right? And that is not just like behavior, it's also like we can see the delight when we do the evening ritual, which includes prayer, right? And that was actually in Sofian's example, that is where he used the word amen, right? So we know that Sofian uses some words at least. And Dad was absolutely convinced that Sofian has a rich spiritual life, that something happens in that moment of prayer between Jesus and Sofian. Now, that's a theological interpretation, granted, but the point here is we do know, right? At the same time, Dad said also, well, what exactly Sofian believes? I don't know. What exactly is going on between God and Sofian? I don't know. It was really remarkable that we do know and we don't know. Now, and what we need to do as researchers, I think, is to listen to this. And at least we start to know something. Right. Now, with that, I hope I've convinced you that this study is important, and actually that we can know more than that is sometimes assumed, and that we've tried our very best to get some knowledge here. And so we want now to just present 5 highlights from the interviews that we did. And the first one, Sheila is going to talk to that. Sheila, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Leon, for giving all the background and the context for the research that we have done and that we are talking about and discussing this morning. So, as Leon was saying, we've done the research, and now we want to talk about some of the things, the key highlights that came out of our interaction with our non or minimally speaking autistic participants. And one of the first key highlights is when it comes to the question of what faith, in terms of its participation and practice, looks like for non and minimally speaking autistic participants. And what we discovered was that faith was usually a lived experience. So what faith practice looked like was a lived experience and something that was experienced through doing. So there was always an active and embodied and participatory element to the practice of faith and spirituality for the participants we engage with. And what this shows is a spiritual life that is enacted much more than discussed, and where meaning sits in activities and rituals, in routines, much more than, talking and what is verbalized. And just comparing this to some of the traditional experiences that some of us have going to church, it shows how for these participants, faith wasn't about just traditionally, like what some of us get, going to church, to sit down, listen to a preacher, think about what you've heard, and then receive and go away. But it was more than just that cognitive practice. So faith was embodied, it was participatory. So that activities like prayers, set prayers, singing, going on pilgrimage, sensory mediators like lighting of candles, stained glass. There was a participant who whose carer said he likes to watch or stare intently at stained glass windows in religious environments. And well, that was his way of gaining something. Like Leon was saying, what we know and what we don't know. But what we know, or what they knew, was that he did like looking at stained glass windows and got something from it. And so all of these practices, some which continued at home, like personalized liturgies, evening prayers, prayers before bedtime, certain songs, all work to extend this faith practice or life even beyond just church or a Sunday, but extend it throughout normal daily life and activities. So just to summarize that point, routines and participatory activities served or looked like a way of access to faith and faith practice for the participants we engaged with. So what faith looks like is something that is active, that is embodied, that is participatory, more than something that is just cognitive and passive for our participants. And then Leon will go on and talk about the next key highlight.
Yeah, thank you, Sheila. That was very well explained indeed. So the second thing the second highlight, and I should say we don't call them themes at this stage because our analysis is still in progress, but this is definitely certain things that came up from the analysis of our interviews so far. We're not certain at this point, like these are definitely the themes, but they are highlights and I hope relevant to talk about today. So the second highlight is music seemed to be the spiritual lingua franca versus Bible reading. So these two just stood out from the interviews. Almost everybody loved music, listening to music, or some making music. Here's talking about that Barry, that's the carer of Judah, completed on behalf of Judah, basically. And when it came to Descartes listening to music, he said, well, the mat is too small for this. It needs to be outside of the mat. It's just like, this is just so important. Now, this is an extreme example maybe, but listening to music, making music or singing, those three cards were all related to music. I think all participants put them right at the left-hand side of the mat. It was all thumbs up. It was all like, this is important to us. This is what we engage with a lot. What it exactly says, I don't know, but it is remarkable and something to highlight because it stood out. At the same time, it's almost funny that Bible reading was not important at all. Now, we need to nuance that a little bit. The card says reading the Bible, and some took that quite literally as reading the Bible, which a lot of hardly any of our participants did. Now, I explained then that reading the Bible could be also listening to Bible stories or have it explained to them or whatever. And so some moved that a little bit more to the middle. Bible reading was hardly important for any one of them. And just, I say it's almost funny. I grew up in a Protestant church, and Bible reading, of course, was very important, right? Bible is the sacred book for Christians, and nevertheless, that was not a big part of the spirituality of our participants. So just wanted to highlight that here because it was so clear in our data, and it seemed worth to including that today in the presentation. And again, what we exactly need to do with this, what the conclusions are, I don't know. Maybe the conclusion should be that we should tell Bible stories through music. Maybe that helps. I don't know. But anyways, that was the second highlight. Now the third highlight, and I'm going to hand over to Sheila again.
Yes. So this is what we called a co-created spirituality. And yeah, we found this a very interesting concept that came out. So what that showed, or what we found, was that the faith practice, or what faith looked like for our participants, was something that was co-created. And this is a spirituality that is co-created in trusted relationships. And those relationships would usually be, family members, carers, siblings, and the immediate support systems of the autistic individuals. So these carers and parents, or these support systems, usually served in two ways when it came to this co-created spirituality. So they were, first of all, interpreters. And what this involved was they were able to read, to try to understand and to translate the communication and the cues they were receiving from their loved ones, or the ones they were caring for. And then these interpretations then lead them to certain actions, which come out in activities and all of these, some of these embodied forms of spirituality examples that I gave earlier. So the co-creation with parents, carers, and those support systems come first as them acting as interpreters, and not only interpreters, but also as companions. So when activities have been developed through that discerning process, then they are also partners with the autistic individuals in living and embodying some of these practices and activities. So when Leon was talking about that issue of knowing and not knowing, this also comes out a bit in that, wherein we see the carers and those immediate support systems interpreting and discerning based on what they are receiving, the communication they are receiving from the individuals. And so they act in this advocacy kind of role. However, they balance that advocacy also with humility. So they can say, yes, we are doing these things because this is what we have received. This is how we've interpreted it. And we think they like it. But we also don't know 100%. We can't be sure, because at the end of the day, like Leon was saying, what they are getting from it and what it really means is between them and God. So carers and parents act as co-creators with the autistic individuals in what then becomes the spiritual practice, or the forms of faith and spirituality that they practice. I link this to that biblical concept of community, and especially a philosophy that comes from African culture and tradition, which is called Ubuntu. And Ubuntu just means I am because you are. So it's a philosophy about interdependence and how human beings depend on each other. And this is very similar to what the Bible says in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, the verses 21 and 26, where it talks about one part of the body can't say, you are less important and you are not needed. And when one part suffers, the other suffers. So is this co-created spirituality brings all that out about how the spirituality and faith that comes out is one that is interdependent, one that is formed in companionship, and one that is a partnership. So that is one of the key and interesting perspectives that we were able to nail from our research. Now, this has implications, especially for the support and who is offering that support as well. And Liam is going to lean into that aspect now.
Just very briefly to add to that, if spirituality is co-created between the autistic person and the carer or the family, as Sheila just explained, and which we think we could clearly see in our interviews, in the stories that we've heard, then that means that there is a need for training in the spirituality of carers. And I'm reminded of an article written by Precious Sango and Rachel Forrester Jones in 2019. Precious Sango did research in two care facilities, one that was more faith-based and one that was not faith-based. And she could see a clear difference in the kind of, I guess, the confidence you'd say that carers had in supporting the people in their care. And so just if co-created spirituality is indeed an important theme, if spirituality is co-created, And if we are serious about giving holistic care, then spirituality should be a part of that. And therefore, it seems that carers also need to be trained in that. That's just the point that we wanted to make here. And let's move on quickly. I'm looking at the time, so we need to move on. The fourth highlight is access within and beyond walls. And that really has to do with the physical access to community. So to what extent determines physical access to a church building, in this case, the level of engagement from and with community? So a couple of things here, just the highlights from the interviews. So Judah attends a church with a carer or family. So not much more to say there. Gemma compares actually 3 communities that she's been part of. And one was really not very welcoming. A second one was quite welcoming. But then there was a third community that was very much more welcoming, where she felt that she really could be herself in ways that she couldn't in the other 2 communities, even if that second community was much better than the first one. And so the physical access there was quite important. And in the second community, one of the things that struck her there and made her feel welcome was that there was a ramp somewhere in the church. And she was like, oh, wait a sec, I'm actually welcome because I'm a wheelchair user and I can now actually access here. The building, but even the stage. So that comparison was really interesting to hear. Sofian, he is very welcome, but currently he cannot attend physically due to anxieties that he has. And so for 14 months, he has not been in church. And even though he's very welcome in his community and very accepted and all of that, people care about him, there's a real diminished contact with the community simply because he cannot attend physically. Angus, then, he's not going to certain parts of the worship service. So his mama said, well, we have very lengthy time of prayer, and I could just see that Angus wasn't, it was just not helpful for him at all. And it just created a lot of stress. He would go to the gens for extended periods of time, and mom just knew that he wasn't happy, and so mom got a lot of stress because of that. And so in the end, she decided just to not let Angus to certain parts of the worship service, just to make it more feasible to be in the parts where they wanted to be. And actually, at the moment, they worship online, which works much better as well for Angus. And finally, Louis' mum says, well, we are not really being invited. And so they create their own community, including weekly online prayer group. And so you see different levels of physical access to a community. And in our observation, that quite impacts then also the way people feel part of the community. Right. Just in the final couple of minutes that we have, very briefly, there were 2 theological discussion points that came up from the data. One was dignity. Like a lot of interviewees said, well, no, I am, like the autistic person said, I am made in the image of God. I'm good as I am. I don't need to change. You don't need to pray for healing. You don't need to pray the autism away or whatever. I'm fine as I am. I'm created in the image of God, and I've got something to give. And then there was something about a theology of mystery that Sheila will briefly speak to.
Yes. So yes, we also saw this come out, and we've called it the theology of mystery. There's a Bible verse. Leon, maybe if you click, that will come up. Yes, that grounds this theology of mystery. Is this verse from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12, which says, "For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know, just as I also am known." So what we felt come out was for leaving space for a theology of mystery. That next slide, please. What this means is that presently, like that scripture says, for now we see dimly. So our present is that we have limited knowledge and understanding of some of these issues that we are seeking understanding on, and that is fine. Now we see shadows and reflections And theology demands that we recognize some of these limitations. So now our present is that we don't understand everything, and that is fine. Now that verse goes on to talk about the future, because it says, but then I shall know as I am known, but then I shall see face to face. And again, what that communicates theologically is that our future is perfect understanding. So there's going to come a time when we are going to understand fully what some of these mysteries are. So there are mysteries, we don't understand all of them, but that is okay. But there is hope that in the future, a time is coming when we shall have perfect understanding of some of these mysteries. Now, what does that mean for us to live with mystery and to live in the present mystery? What that means is for us to embrace the unknown. So let's give way and leave way for what is unknown, what is mysterious. So embracing the unknown, things like faith beyond verbal communication. So we saw from various examples from our participants how various things like stained glass windows, being in nature. So many things that don't speak verbally do speak theologically. So that reminds me of that verse from the Bible, the heavens declare the glory of God. So there's a lot of non-verbal theology all around us. The Bible does talk about that as well. So there's faith beyond verbal communication, and it's up to us, or we must be willing to embrace what is unknown, because we don't know anything. In the present, what that also means is that we rest in God's knowledge. We don't know, but God knows, and one day we shall all know. So having faith and trust in God, faith itself is mysterious. So having faith and trust in God, that yes, there will come a time when we will understand some or all of these things. So yes, in terms of some of the theological inputs that came out of the research, this was one of them, leaving space for the theology of mystery, for what we know and what we don't know, because that is also okay. Leon?
So in conclusion then, we started with noticing the absence of non-minimally speaking autistic people from research and faith communities. But Barry, Judah's carer, said, and I quote him literally, "It's an absolute honor to have a relationship with Judah." Similarly, Elena, one of Lewis's carers, said, and I quote again, "I think everyone should meet Lewis. I feel like everybody should come and work with Lewis because you'll learn so much from him and about the world. But it's going into his world as well." And so what we see is there is this absence, there is maybe the fear or just the lack of understanding or knowledge or skills. But actually those, if we start listening to those who are very closely related to autistic people and minimally speaking autistic people, they testify to the honor it is to have a relationship with them, what they learn from being in that relationship, how blessed they feel. It was remarkable to see that. And so just to highlight a couple of things, summarize a couple of things, our research shows richly textured spirituality and religiosity, even if that looks different from what one might be used to. And even if some of it remains a mystery to those around the person. Those who make the effort to develop a relationship with autistic people do feel blessed. And so I think there is real need, we think there's a real need to raise awareness in faith communities about the spiritual lives of non-minimally speaking autistic people, so they can be a blessing to their communities as well. And there's a need to train caregivers in supporting the spiritual and religious lives of people in their care. And finally, nobody is less than, but all are made in the image of God, theologically speaking. Thank you very much. Do not hesitate to get in touch if you want to know more, but I look forward to the Q&A. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that fantastic presentation and for enabling us to engage with the voices, though not spoken voices in all cases, of autistic people of faith, and to see something, as you say, of the richness and texture of their faith and of the blessing they bring to those engaged with them. And thank you too for your theological reflection on those findings. There's a lot of traffic in the chat, which is fantastic. If what you've put in the chat is a question that you would like me to put to Leon and Sheila after the break, please could you put that copy and paste maybe into the Q&A, and you will see at the top of your screen next to the little chat button there is a Q&A tab. So please would you use that if you have a question you would like me to put to Leon and Sheila. We will have a 5-minute break now, comfort break to enable you to do what you need to do, stretch your legs, get a drink, and we will come back together for the Q&A at 11:57. So see you in 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for coming back for the Q&A. We're picking up that some people may not have access to that Q&A tab at the top. So apologies for that. If you don't have access, as Amand has said in the chat, please put your question in the chat. But when you put it, could you add a note asking for it to be added into the Q&A? Because that's the stream from which I'll be putting questions to Leon and Sheila. Just to say as well that we will be finishing at 12:30 to give everybody a chance for a good hour's break if you're coming back for the afternoon session. So, Leon and Sheila, we have a question. Did you find any patterns in tradition preference, worship tradition preference, I'm assuming, amongst non and minimally speaking autistic people? And we've got some examples in that question. For example, contemplative, evangelical, traditional, Pentecostal.
Yeah, I can reply to that. I think so. We had 7 core participants, if you want. So 7 autistic people. They were from various backgrounds. We had Catholics, we had African, Pentecostal, we had Anglicans. It was quite varied, and on the basis that it was just 7 participants, it's very hard to speak about patterns. So we didn't look for that, but we also didn't see it necessarily. It has crossed my mind a couple of times when analyzing the interviews and listening to them. Do I see any differences? I couldn't make out any differences with any kind of confidence, saying, "Oh, this was typically Catholic," for example. So, for example, you would maybe say, "Oh, reading the Bible is really important for Protestants, but maybe less so for Catholics," which maybe is also a stereotype. So we need to be careful, anyways, with that. So yeah, what's his name? I can't think of his name now because it's pseudonyms and I've got real names in my head. But there was one participant, Judah. It was Judah. He is Catholic. Bible reading was not important to him at all. Mum was almost apologetic about it, almost apologized for it. But then, it was not necessarily because he was Catholic, because for others it wasn't that important either. I should also say there was one participant, Kieran, who does not regularly go to church, doesn't necessarily have a faith or identifies as a Christian or a believer. He had been to several churches, and he did respond to the call for participants, and we decided to include him because from his perspective, he had some really pertinent observations to make that were helpful for the study. Again, this is not about representation of certain traditions. It's really trying to get to as much of an understanding as we can about spirituality and religion for this group of people.
Thank you. Yeah. Sheila, did you want to? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, again, Leon was saying, and like I was saying about the role of co-creators of spirituality, it's all about, to a large extent, what is observed and how it's interpreted, and then what reactions are received back to then determine, how a person is enjoying this or whether they like it or not. So one of the questions was talking about, the different traditions in terms of what's contemplative, and I'm assuming Pentecostal means what's a bit, in quotes, and forgive me, hyped up or hyper or more animated kind of styles of worship. Again, different people, display different preferences. So I do remember one of the interviews where, and Leon and I were discussing it a bit later on, how I was moved about, during the interview. I'm not sure whether it was a carer or a parent was singing a song, a religious gospel song, and then the minimally speaking individual was singing along at certain places, so the parent will sing and then pause and then they would continue and all of that. There were people who also, apart from listening to music or singing, were also involved in making music with various instruments, and those who have different tempos and styles and all of those things. So I think it's a personal preference. So there wasn't any set tradition, or well, for now we can't comment on any styles that were for a set tradition, but what we saw was a variety and diversity of how people reacted to and enjoyed different styles and approaches to worship and different church practices.
Thank you. There's a lot of interest in the questions in the talking mats, which is great. So hopefully lots of people will come back at 1:30 for more information about that. But for now, that we've got a cluster of questions around how you chose this particular form of communication rather than other symbol communication systems, and whether or not talking mats are bound to one particular culture. You know, whether you have any reflections on that. And I can give more examples of details that have been put in the questions if that would be helpful. And then also an interesting question about how much you knew before undertaking the interviews about the degree to which participants, the degree of comprehension in the use of these symbols. And that's related from this questionnaire to a question about the cognitive abilities of the participants. So there's quite a lot there, quite a bundle of questions. So if you could respond to what stands out to you, thank you.
I guess that is a question that I should answer. Right, why talking mats? There, as often in research and in qualitative research, there is also a practical element. I knew of talking mats. Don't ask me how I came across talking mats, but I came across it years ago. I was interested in it, and I knew it could be. And talking mats also have a training program, so you can be trained in using. Actually, you have to be trained in using talking mats actually to understand exactly what's going on, because there is a whole theory behind that, and to do it well. And so it was one of the things that I knew. So I decided to do a training, and for the training I had to develop I had to do a talking mat with someone. It was summertime. I wanted to do it with a non-speaking or minimally speaking autistic person, couldn't find any. And then someone who's also autistic and very articulate, so he's not non-speaking, very kindly volunteered to to help me out over summer with this assignment that I had. And what really struck me doing that was that he absolutely loved it. He absolutely loved doing the talking mat because it structured the conversation in a particular way. And you will have seen in the overview of the participants, I did the talking mats with the carers as well, and one after the other absolutely liked doing it, or even loved doing it, because it gives that structure and it gives particular topics to talk about where you do not necessarily think about. At the same time, there's also a set of blank cards. So when I tried this and I had this makeshift kind of own symbol set for spirituality. One of the first times I tried it, someone said well, but you're missing a particular card, and it was quite fundamental, and it's so embarrassing that I don't dare to repeat it here. I'll do it for full transparency. I forgot to include prayer, right? So quite fundamental. But so there's the blank cards where you can add things. So it's not necessarily of course it's I fully accept that it's steering the conversation in a particular way. But that is sometimes what people exactly need in order to, it is enabling communication. That's at the core of this, right? It's enabling communication, especially for those who struggle to have a conversation without any assistance, as it were, from pictures or whatever. And so it's enabling that. So why this? Why not another? So that was a very practical consideration. And then because I saw what Talking Mats could do, I approached people, the participants, and said, well, if you're willing, I would like to try this with you. If you're not willing, we are not doing it. So as you saw in the overview, there were 3 participants who didn't do it. It was Kieran and his mum and Gemma. Now interestingly, they were quite articulate in other ways, and maybe they didn't feel the need for it. But also, just to add to that, I interviewed one family member, and I'm not going to say who it is, and they were a little bit hesitant when I came out with the Talking Mat, and they said, well, do we really have to do this? I said, no, you don't have to do it. And okay, they decided to give it a try, so I didn't push that. I didn't put any pressure on them. I don't think I did. And then they were like, oh, but it's actually, this really works. This is actually fun. But my child is not going to engage with this. And he didn't, right? So it was a caregiver who did it on his behalf. Now, that person didn't engage with the interview in any obvious way, although those who knew him well said, like, it was remarkable that he stayed in the room. It was remarkable how he engaged with it in that way. And again, this is the knowledge that the carers have, right? That I didn't have. So anyways, I'm digressing here. So that was one of the reasons, because I saw that it could potentially work. I didn't force it on people. People chose to engage with it, and one after another, all of them really liked it. Is there a cultural bias in Talking Mats? Possibly, although it's also being used in Japan, I believe. It's actually used around the world, but I know that there's a lot of interest in Japan. And if I'm correct, but ask Margot McKay this afternoon. She's the CEO of Talking Mats. She will introduce the spirituality set. I think I recently heard her say that it actually fits very well with Japanese culture, just the way of communicating. So, okay, interesting. They're going to introduce it in South Africa, hopefully in a couple of months, and they're actually thinking of including this spirituality set. Yay! So is it culturally? The pictures are they are really keen on having very diverse representation of skin colors, of abilities, physical abilities, all of that. So yeah. But is there a cultural bias? No doubt there is. Is it tried in other cultures? Yes, absolutely. Does it work in other cultures? Yes. That's what I know about Talking Mats. Did I know beforehand whether people were able to engage with it? I checked with the caregivers or the persons themselves if they were able to engage at that level. And then we gauged like what was possible, what's not possible, and we went and as I said, like when I tried it, all people were really happy to engage with it. Sorry, that's long enough an answer, I think.
Sheila, did you want to add anything? No. Well, another thing that has had a lot of interest in the Q&A is your finding about music. So we have sort of 2 emphases really in the questions about that. One is about whether the enjoyment of music was music in general, or whether specifically religious or faith-related music was particularly important for spirituality and meaning making. And then the other question was really about whether the engagement with music went any further than listening, or whether you found anything about participation in music. You mentioned somebody singing, but also the question is about dancing or use of instruments or more active involvement in other ways.
Sheila, do you want to start with that?
Okay, so I'll comment briefly on the music aspect. Yes. So yeah, we call that theme music as spiritual lingua franca. So by this we mean, although the enjoyment of music and what it stands for was there, but it was more than just the enjoyment or listening to music. But that involvement of music, the use of music, was almost like an access route. It was a language. So the majority of participants did have some connection to music, either in singing and listening to it, making the music. So music itself, it's like a root, a language of participation, yes, in different things, but in this instance, in spirituality. And some of this music was, all types of music, rhymes, nursery rhymes, general music, what people would call secular music, but also spiritual and religious music as well. So that example I gave of the participant who was singing along with their co-creator a song, that was a gospel song, and at certain points they knew the words and what to say and how to emphasize those aspects they were coming in. So yeah, that's just kind of a broad overview. Music as a form of language, as a route or access of communication, but in this instance, communication in terms of faith and spirituality. Yeah. Leon?
Yeah, there was a second part to that question. Was it engagement like beyond music, with dance and those kind of things?
Yes, more embodiment, more than any embodied engagement.
Yeah, I would need to think, and I would need to go back to the interviews in detail to see that. But there was definitely sometimes talk about dance. There was definitely the embodied aspect. So the first highlight that Sheila spoke to was that kind of active versus kind of not cognitive faith, because that is a false contrast. But it's like it is that picture, like for a lot of people, when you look at faith, it looks like sitting in the pew listening to a sermon and all of that. There was very little of that with our participants, right? Some of them simply couldn't sit still for that long, but some could, and some did. And this another that was really interesting as well. Another instance of how do you know? I think it was Judah's mum who said, "Well, we know that Judah wants to be in church because normally he doesn't sit still for an hour at all, and he could walk away, and he doesn't. So, and he knows that going to church means sitting, and they go weekly. It means sitting still for an hour. Now, he might be more interested in biscuits afterwards, she admitted, but it needs to be a really good biscuit if he really wants to sit still for an hour, where normally that is something that's almost impossible for you. So maybe there's more than just the biscuits, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so it is definitely an embodied faith. And again, what do we know? This is that question, right? Do we really know whether it's faith? Well, for some participants, it seems absolutely yes. Other participants we can be less sure of. But in all instances, it is embodied and quite active in that sense. Whether that is embodied in a very structured way, or whether that's just like, I can't sit still and need to get up and regulate myself, that's something else. And we need to do more analysis, I think, before I could say anything firm about it. But definitely embodiment was important. And sometimes that was expressed in dance or different art ways. We actually quite a few participants engaged with art as well, like crafts, drawing, painting, those kind of things.
Yeah. One example comes to mind about a participant who spoke about singing. So they are minimally speaking, and they said for quite a while when they went to church, one of the parts they felt not so good about was when there was a hymn and people were singing and they couldn't participate. Now they couldn't participate because they did not feel confident enough about how they would sound and how other people would take it. But with time, they started to sing along with the singing, and then everybody in the church was like, wow, they were coming to them after church to say, wow, that was so interesting, and so she's grown in her confidence, and now she's so happy she can participate. So now she's so comfortable, when the song comes, everybody's singing, and now she's even added her voice, and she doesn't care how it comes out, but she's singing whatever comes out, and she's signing, and people have embraced that and engaged with that and come to speak to her after church about how wonderful it is with how she's participating in church. Yeah, so that also forms part of that embodied. So for her, it was very sad initially that she loved the singing, but didn't know how to participate. But she found her way, and then that was embraced. Now she's happy to be part of that embodied and participatory aspects of worship.
Thank you. And I love the way you're weaving stories from your research into these answers. It really brings it alive. There's a number of questions, I think more around methodology. One just simple, one about, well, two questions about the sample, which hopefully you can respond to fairly briefly because they're quite factual, about the age range, and also given that you ended up with a smaller sample even than you had hoped for, whether you have any plans to increase that.
Great. So first question, age range. I think it was all 18, above 18, and the oldest was in their 60s, and so everything in between, really. Yeah. So that's the first question. It's a small sample. Are we planning to do more? I love that question because the answer is yes. I'm actually involved in another research project where we do very similar study, focusing more specifically on the role of language in spirituality and religion. And yes, that project is underway as we speak. So yeah, we hope to have more participants for that as well. Yeah.
So that's fantastic and very exciting. Then there's also a couple of questions about directions, future. That's moved us very nicely into the questions about future directions. One question is about whether you have any plans to further investigate conversation partner training. And the other one, I'm going to just read this out exactly as it's written. It says, do you have ideas of creating different objective outcome measures so as not to have the same obstacles in research? So I can repeat that if it would be helpful.
Yes,
yeah.
Please.
Do you have ideas of creating different objective outcome measures so as not to have the same obstacles in research?
Okay, I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can start by commenting on the obstacles of research, and maybe on one point, and it's the point we raised about recruitment. So why are people or minimally speaking people not present in research? And then we did talk about, well, ending up with the sample size that we had, in spite of the vision, our aspirations. Yes, it's a lot about recruitment. How, like Leon was saying, we can't use the traditional and normal ways of recruiting for research participants for this group of research participants, or even many other different groups. So they need to tailor research approaches to specific groups and not apply general approaches to all groups. And for me, when it comes to this particular group of research participants, I think it starts with relationship. As Leon was saying, so Leon did almost all of the interviews in this part of the research, and the way he's talking about the participants and the knowledge that he has about the carers and the people he interacted with, speaks a lot about relationship. So relationship has been developed where he is known and they are known, and there's trust. So when it comes to ways of going around recruitment, when it comes to such these types of research, then the first one for me would be relationships. So making sure there's a relationship, trusted relationships, and that then opens avenues for access, and then for listening and discussing some of these things. What we have been able to do, I think, is a start. So yeah, in a way, we have broached that. We've opened the door, And I'm hoping that as people listen and engage with some of what the little we have done, it will give people a lot more confidence, if you like, to even come up, so that somebody can, maybe even get engaged and come up and say, oh, I want to be involved, or I have something to say, or something like that. Yes. So this being a small way of starting the conversation, but it has a lot to do when it comes to recruitment for such projects, to do with making sure there's a relationship, and a relationship that is trustful, so that people are willing to participate. Because at the end of the day, there is no research, without participating. We are not talking about ourselves or giving our views. We are just helping to put out the views of the most important people in the research, which is the people who had the views in the first place.
Well said, Sheila. I love that. Definitely trust is so important, in what we did come across on occasion is also the mistrust. It's like, well, why would we participate? Because researchers have not always been the best allies of this group of people. And so researchers just deal with it. I mean, this is like the legacy that we've built for ourselves by not engaging in ways that were trustworthy, or whatever. And so there is some of that as well. When you study the literature in terms of like what are the methods in terms of engaging with non-speakers, one of the things that comes across really, I mean, insofar there's literature, but there is some. One of the things that stands out clearly, and I've talked to quite a few researchers trying to do this kind of research, and one thing that stands out is you need to you need to get to know the participants, and two, you need to get to know how they want to communicate. So when it comes to objective outcome measures, well, the word objective is maybe a little bit fraught anyways in research. What's objectivity? But okay, let's deal with it. Let's roll with that for now. When you're talking about objective outcome measures, you're probably talking in the semantic field of quantitative studies, where we can measure things, and therefore, by definition, we need to do the same across the board in order for it to have some measure of objectivity. So, in a way, that is almost, or it jars with the kind of research that we've done, where you emphasize that you need to get to know the person, get to know how they communicate, and all of that. And so, how do you bring those two together? That's really, really difficult. And I'm not dismissing that we need to think about it. On the contrary, in the other projects we've chosen for now to work actually with Talking Mats as a kind of giving some of that kind of similar groundwork, as it were. And we've done that basically in this study as well. By working with Talking Mats with all these participants, you get something that gives a coherent picture, because you ask the same questions, you use the same symbols, and it has resulted in the outcome of the music, for example, right? So yeah, it is definitely a question that I'm thinking about a lot. And in the other project, I'm working with psychologists, the research psychologists, and we're trying to come up with good measures, but the key remains that you need to get to know the person. And I think that is also the point that is missing in autism studies in general, where a lot of quantitative research happens, but and I'm not against that at all, don't get me wrong. I think that's incredibly important, and I've done some of that myself with that research psychologist. However, there is a limit to the depth of understanding that you can reach with quantitative measures. And I think when we do this kind of research, nothing beats getting to know a person, right? And that's what we try to do. And well, whether we succeeded or not, that's not a question. I hope that helps. Conversation partner training, as in the conversation partner of the autistic person, of the non-speaking person. I don't have plans to develop any such training. I have come across by speaking to people that is incredibly important. And again, there is nothing that beats getting to know a person, being in that relationship. However, the Talking Mats is actually providing a structured way for communicating, and you have a conversation partner, And Talking Mats does a training, and actually we will announce a training in this spirituality resource set this afternoon as well. So, spoiler.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm mindful of the time, and we did commit to finishing at 12:30. So I'm so sorry to those people who have put questions in that I haven't managed to put to Leon and Sheila. As ever, the questions sped up towards the end as people got more and more engaged. So I'm so sorry if I wasn't able to convey yours. One question that I will mention was a request for book or article recommendations, and I'm just mentioning that in the hope that that's something that can maybe be shared in another format after the conference or after this day of the conference. So it falls to me to thank you again, Leon and Sheila, for this fantastic insight into your ongoing research, which is so exciting, and it gives so much hope that you are two researchers who are trying to change the autistic community's experience, which has perhaps not always been good, of researchers, by your really dedicated focus on being with those people and building trust and forming relationship. And certainly that's the strong message that I've taken from your session this morning. So thank you very much. And very much looking forward to this afternoon's session. So a reminder for everybody, we will resume at 1:30 p.m, so 1 hour for lunch. And in the afternoon session, as Leon has said, we will have Margot McKay, the CEO of Talking Mats, with some exciting news that Leon has kind of spilled already. But nonetheless, please do come back for the official, unofficial launch of the Spirituality Talking Mats and the training. It's going to be brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your engagement. Have a great lunch and see you back in an hour. Bye-bye.